Hey guys, this is Mitch with FinePoint CGI, and today we're going to create our character controller for our horror game. So we're going to go through the process of creating our basic character element, and we're going to create our basic movement. So, going forward, backwards, left, right, things like that. And then we're going to go over how to do crouching and uncrouching and how to actually add a flashlight to your character. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to set up some organization. Since this is our first video, we just created our project. We need to actually put together what our project structure is going to look like. And we need to make sure it's extremely organized, because if it's not organized, this entire project's going to fall apart really, really quick into this big old mess. So first, we're going to right click down here. We are going to add in a new folder, and our first folder is going to be called models, and that's where all of our 3D models are going to be located. And then we're going to right click, add in a new folder, and we're going to call this materials. And then we're going to right click, add in another new folder, and we are going to call this scripts. And the next one, we're going to create two more folders. We're going to name this one scenes, and then the final one, which we are going to name levels. Now, levels will probably never expand past a couple of them, depending on how big this project gets or how big this game gets. It really depends on how we want it to work. Materials is where our materials are going to be located. And I know you're looking at this going, well, where's the textures, right? Well, this is something that we're going to have a conversation about. We can either, underneath our materials, have our textures and our materials next to each other, or we could have a textures folder specifically for our textures. Usually, I like to have my materials in subfolders with my textures attached, and I'll show you that method, and we can, change it if we feel like changing it. Models is for our models, and for all of our 3D models, things like that. Scenes will be for our scenes, and scripts will be for our scripts. So pretty simple. Now that we have our organization kind of settled, let's actually create our character controller. Now this will be the base character controller that we're going to use to kind of inform the rest of our game. So first we'll come up here to 3D scene. We'll click on that. We're going to right click this, and we are going to change our type right here to a character body 3D. And then we're going to right click this guy, add in a child node, and we're going to add in a mesh instance 3D. We're going to change that mesh into a capsule mesh. And then we're going to right click our node 3D and add in a collision shape 3D. And we're going to change that into a capsule shape. Now we'll match these guys up, and then I'm going to select these two guys. I'm going to drag this guy up here like that. Perfect. And then we need to have a camera for our character. So we'll right click, add in a child node, and add in a camera. Now I will go through what all of this is in about 2 seconds once we get our camera settled. So we'll just kind of put our camera right here. We can preview that and see if that works. I think that'll do it for us. Now, what are these things? So we have a character body 3D. Character body 3D is Godot's kinematic body 3D. They just basically renamed it to a character body 3D. If you come in here and you add it in a kinematic, you'll see that it is now gone. That's because they replaced it with the character body, basically. Mesh instance is your mesh instance. It's literally just a mesh. So if we had a character mesh that we wanted to use, like an actual character, like a game character, we could replace this mesh with that game character, and we might be doing that in the future. Collision shape allows us to have collision. You'll see that our character body, if we don't have this, if I delete this guy here, you'll see that our node 3D has an exclamation point, and that's because it has to have collision. If you have a character body without collision, then there's no reason for it to exist. Right? It has to have collision for it to really make sense in your world. That's not to say that you can't have a character body without collision. It's just extremely not recommended. Now, so I added that, and then we added it in as a shape capsule because you need to define the shape. And since it's the default shape, it just snapped perfectly around our object. And then we need a camera because this is a first-person game, so we need to have a camera. Now, that's pretty much all we need, at least at the beginning of this. Okay, we're going to need to add some more stuff to this in the future, but right now, this is really all we need. So we'll hit Control S. And we'll save this scene under scenes as character .tscn, and there we go. Now we're going to need a place for this character to walk around. So let's go to our scene, new scene, and let's create a 3D scene. Now for our scene, we can just right click, add in a child node, and add in a CSG mesh like this. And we could add in just a regular mesh if we want to, but a box primitive will work just as well. So we'll just add that guy in, and we'll zoom out like this, and we'll make it, you know, about this big, give or take. So we'll just make it nice and big, and we'll kind of make it, you know, thinner. And then we can just add collision by coming over here to the right and clicking use collision. Awesome. So that pretty much solves most of our problems here, right? And then we can just basically drag our character up into the world like that and pull him up so that way he's got a little bit of space to fall down, and then we could walk around, right? Now we don't actually have any script to this character, so let's go back to our character and let's right click our character and attach a script, okay? Now, since this first tutorial is GD script, we're going to make a character controller through GD script. Now, here's something that's new with Godot, which is really, really cool. We have this template, and this template allows us to actually have a built-in template system that we can use for our characters. So think of it kind of like if you had an item and you wanted to build a base class for everyone to kind of inherit from, that's kind of what this is. It's literally a pre-built script that you can reuse elsewhere. So in our case, we'll just take the basic movement and we will name it character.gd. That's totally fine. So we'll click create. And there we go. We have ourselves a basic character controller. It's really that easy. Godot has made it so easy to actually build this out. So really, if we wanted to, we could save this guy, come into our other scene. So if I go to 3D, click on our other scene, hit Control S, and I name this as test scene.tscn under scenes. And we'll take our character.gd and drag this into scripts as well. So that way it's just kind of nice and organized. If we click on our test scene and we hit play, this play right here, not this play, because if you hit this one, it's going to ask you to create a default scene. And we don't really want to do that right now. So we'll click on this scene right here. And you'll see that our character exists. Now, we can't use WASD. You'll see right here that it's not really working. But if I use the arrow keys, you'll see that our character can move. It's really that simple. Now, we can't move our camera, and we can't really do anything. We can't really do much other than jump. So we can jump and move around with the arrow keys. And that's basically it. So we're going to need to make a lot of changes here. So first, let's get WASD working, and let's get our mouse movement working. So we'll come up to project settings, and we will come over to input map, and we'll add a new action. And let's just call this move left, move right, move forward, and move backwards. Now, if you just hit enter, it will actually allow you to add these, and then you can continuously add them. So for instance, we could also have like interact and flashlight. See what I mean? So it makes it really fast and easy to use. So now we can just come over here, click on the little plus icon, and it'll listen for an input. So you just hit something like move left. So left is A for us. So hit OK. Move right is D. Move forward is W. Move backwards is S. Interact is E, right? And flashlight is generally F, so we'll go with that. And there we go. Now, that's one of the coolest things about Godot 4 versus Godot 3.5 is the input system has been really streamlined and made a lot easier for us. So now we can click close and then click on our character script. Now you have here get input vector UI left, UI right, UI up, and UI down. So we can just change this to move left, move right, move forward, and move backwards. And that should about do it. So if we hit play, you will see that now we can use WASD and we can now move around, which is pretty cool. Now we need to make it so we can actually move our camera around. And Godot has this nice fancy function available to us to actually do that. And that function is called input. So if we click this guy up, we come down here, we type func_input event. And this function runs whenever we do an input into Godot. So if we hit W or Q or R, or if we move our mouse, or if we click, or really if we do pretty much anything, this will exist and it will run this event. Now, we don't want it to fire and run our code all of the time, right? Because we only want it to happen whenever the mouse moves on the screen, right? Because we're trying to move our character's camera, right? So we can't just say, hey, like we're just going to run this whenever, right? We need it to only run when we move our mouse. So first we have to check for that. So if event is input event mouse motion, then we can set our rotation Y. So we'll say rotation.y is equal to minus equals event.relative.x divided by 1000. And then we'll need to set it, multiply it by some kind of sensitivity value. So since we don't actually have a sensitivity value, let's come up here and actually set up a sensitivity value. So that way the user can actually set that. Now, one of the cool things about Godot 4 is we've changed how our exports work. Now you have to hit @export and then whatever it is you're exporting. So var sensitivity, and we'll default that to something like 3, maybe 4. And we'll just change this to sensitivity. So we'll multiply it by our sensitivity. And the reason why we want our event relative X instead of our event relative Y is because if we were to move our mouse up and down like this, then that would be event relative Y and it would affect our rotation Y. And if we rotate our character on the Y axis, if I click on this guy, you'll see that this little green line here is Y. So it would rotate our character like this. So that wouldn't make sense if we were going up and down for it to rotate our character this way, right? It would make sense if we were going this way, right, on the x-axis for us to rotate our character. So we'll do that. And then when we want to look up and down, we don't want to rotate our character on the x-axis because that's going to rotate our collision mesh and everything else, right? We just want to rotate our camera. So we'll hit $camera3D.rotation.x is equal to minus equals event.relative.y divided by 1000 multiplied by sensitivity. And there we go. And now we want to make sure that our rotation on our x-axis stays basically the same, okay? So we'll type rotation.x is equal to clamp by our rotation x, comma, pi divided by -2, comma, pi divided by 2. And that just basically makes sure that we are in between these two values, just in case we get into some kind of funky situation. It should never happen, but I still would like to counter code just in case. So now if we hit play, you should see, providing that I did things correctly, if I go to our test scene and I hit play, there we go. We can actually use our first-person controller. We can look up and down. We can look left and right. Awesome. But you'll notice that it's not capturing our mouse. So you can see that we can kind of do this, and it'll let us move, or like this, and it'll let us look around, right? But it doesn't really work, if that makes sense. So we need to set some kind of way to capture our mouse. Now, the only way to capture the mouse is by changing your mouse input mode. And you want to do that when your character is ready. So let's come up here and type func_ready. And let's say input dot mouse mode is equal to input mouse mode captured. And that will basically do it for us. So if we hit play, there we go. Now our mouse has been captured and we're good to go. Now we really can't get out of this. We'll have to hit Alt F4 to get rid of it, but at least it works. Now what we could do is we could actually set up a way to, uncapture our mouse by setting up some kind of button. So you could actually come in here and say if action pressed, the Alt key, right? Then uncapture the mouse, or do the opposite of whatever it happens to be. And I'll let you guys to do that, and I'll do that in maybe the next video or something like that. But for right now, we'll leave it like that. Now, I know what your next big question is. If we come into our game and we look around, you will notice that we can kind of loop around and actually just kind of flip ourselves upside down, right? And that's kind of a problem, right? That's not something that you're supposed to do. So what is something that we can do to solve that? Well, we can actually limit our value so that way we can't look up or down too far. So let's come down here and hit $camera 3D.rotation.x is equal to clamp, and we'll clamp our rotation x like this, comma, -2, comma, and 2. And that's basically going to clamp us between the value of 2 and the value of -2. And that should give us a pretty good size. The reason why it's 2 and -2 is because Godot gets a little funky with rotation degrees. So that's just the value that I know works. So if we hit play and we look up, you'll see that we can't flip around. And if we look down, you'll see that we can't flip around. I mean, you really can't tell very well because I'm not, it's really hard for me to show you, but it definitely works. So awesome. There we go. And that's basically how we're going to create a very simple camera movement system. Now that we have this, let's add in, now that we have our mouse movement, camera movement working, let's go ahead and set up the ability to crouch. Now, one of the things that I forgot to do in my project settings is to add an actual crouch button. So let's do that now. So make sure you go to project settings, and your input map here, and then type crouch. And let's make that the control button or the C button if you prefer the C button, whichever one. I just prefer control, but if you guys want to use C, you guys can. So we'll hit close. And we'll come into our physics process and we'll come down here and we're going to have to make some small adjustments here. You see how we have speed right here, right? For our constant, which is 5. If we want to have crouch, our crouch speed is going to be slower than our movement speed, right? So let's come down here and let's go with const crouch speed is equal to 2.0. And we'll come down here and we're going to have to make some small adjustments real quick. So down here, we're setting our speed right here, and we're setting our velocity, right? So what we should do is we should come in here and say var speed is equal to speed, and then we'll change these variables into a lowercase speed. And that will allow us to actually change our speed if we're crouching. So now we can just come in here and say if input.isAction just is action pressed crouch, then we can set our speed equal to crouch speed. And that will basically allow us to change our speed. So now when we hit play on our test scene here and we hit, we're moving and we hit control, we start slowing down quite drastically. See that? Which is perfect. That's what we want. So now we just need to get our player to actually crouch down. And to do that, we're going to need to use an animation player. So let's click on our character here. Let's right click our node 3D. Let's add in a child node and let's add in an animation player. It's right there. And what we'll do is we'll click on our animation player. We'll add in an animation. We'll add a new animation and let's call it crouch. And when we want to add an animation, we could do it in a lot of different ways. We can come in here and add our track manually, or we can actually click on our node that we want to set a keyframe, and we can come over here and click on this little key icon right here. So if you click on that, you'll see it's going to pop up and say, hey, do you want to create a new track for property position and insert key? And yes, we do. And we want to use Bezier curves. That's going to give us a lot more flexibility. So let's do that. So we'll hit create. And then we'll drag this guy up to something like, 0.5, 0.6-ish. And let's just move our camera down to something like that. Maybe I think that will work. And then we'll just put a keyframe right there. So now when this animation plays, it will go down just like that. Now that's probably way too quick. So let's pull this guy out just a bit more, maybe to 1. Yeah, that's probably more like an actual crouch. Now we're going to want to add a little bit of bounce to our movement. So if we come here and we see what our actual position is. So our position is 0.96. So if we come down here and go to 0.97, let me see. It's not quite what I want. I think I'm going to go with 0.94 and then put a point like that. Now, if we hit go, we're going to have a slight bounce up when we're done. And we might want to make that go a little bit back just a tiny bit. So if we go back like 2 frames or a frame like that. There we go. And that's going to give our character kind of like a little rise when they crouch, and that'll make it feel a little bit better, if that makes sense. And now we have to do the exact same thing, but the opposite. So we have to go from crouching to uncrouching. So let's go to animation, new, and say uncrouch. And let's start with 1 because we're going to be going up and our camera's already at its reset position. So we'll put that position like this. We'll create it. We'll come down here. And I believe it was 0.97, if I remember correctly. So we'll put it like that, and you'll see that it's going to uncrouch. Now, again, when you uncrouch, your character is going to kind of come up and then rest, if that makes sense. A lot of times when people stand, they stand straight and then they kind of slouch a little bit, and that helps with that little squash and stretch feeling, right? You want to make sure that your character feels like he's in motion. So we'll hit a breakpoint right here, and let's see how high we go. So we go to 0.78. So let's go to 1.80 and put a breakpoint like that, and that will feel hopefully pretty good for the user. So now that we have that, we need to also set up our collision shape because our character needs to get smaller when he crouches, right? When you crouch, you tend to, you take up less space. So your collision mesh needs to get smaller. Now, I'm not really worried about my capsule being, the proper size or anything like that, because to be honest with you, no one's going to see it. So it doesn't really matter. And once we get into like doing actual animations with our characters, then we can start, looking into making it a little bit more realistic, if that makes sense. What we can do is we could have 2 separate collision shapes. One where we're crouched, right? So crouched collision shape, right? And honestly, I should just camel case this. So crouched collision shape. And then we can just duplicate that and have this as uncrouched collision shape. And actually, this crouched collision shape should probably be changed. So we have our collision shape for when we're crouched. Let's just drag this guy down to make it nice and small. So if we drag this up where our camera is, if we drag this guy down, That's about right for our collision, our actual collision shape. So all we're going to do is when the character's uncrouched, we're going to have this collision shape enabled. And when they are crouched, this collision shape is going to be disabled. So that way they don't actually have collision there. So what we'll do is in our collision or in our crouch animation here, we'll throw a keyframe right here. So we'll click create. And we will come down here, and when they're crouched, we will disable it and do that. And then we can do the same thing with uncrouched. When they are crouched, we can have it disabled, like so. And then when they are uncrouched, we can enable it just like that. And that should basically do the basics for our crouch and uncrouch. Now, something that we're going to have to keep track of is we don't want to allow the player to crouch or uncrouch if there's something above them, and we can do some error checking to handle that. But if we done this correctly, if we head over to our test scene and we add in some kind of object to crouch under, so add a child node and add in a CSG box, and then let's make it about, I don't know, about yay big, give or take, and let's just kind of drag it up to about here-ish, and then let's go ahead and turn on collision just like that. And if we've done it correctly, we should be good to go. So we'll hit play. If we run up here, well, it looks like we're colliding through it, which is not ideal. So let's take a look at our character here. And let's see if our crouched is disabled. So let's turn that on. And this is not disabled. So perfect. So let's see if that will work. So let's head back here and hit play, and let's see if we now are colliding. There we go. You can see we are colliding with the object. We can't get through it. If we hit control, now we can get underneath it. Awesome. So that's basically how we can do a basic crouch. Now, one of the big problems that we have with this is we can crouch, but we can also uncrouch when we're underneath an object, which is not exactly ideal. So how can we handle that? Well, this is where raycasting kind of comes in handy. Now, this object has collision, so we should be able to raycast above us and see if there's anything above us. And if there is, then we're not going to be allowed to uncrouch, okay? So what we'll do is we will go into our character here, and we'll just basically add in a small raycast. Now, we can do this one of two ways. We can either do it through code or we can do it through a node. And it's totally up to you. If you come into your character and you right click it and go to add child node, you type ray, you can see they have raycast 3D. And for people who are very visual, raycast 3D, this makes perfect sense and it works really well. So, you can add this in and kind of drag it around and say, okay, the character is going to raycast. If I enable it and I look for the raycast, you can just kind of put it in like this and bam, there you go, right? If you're more of the type of person that wants to raycast in code, you can do that as well, okay? We will do it inside of code, so I'm going to delete that. So we can head over to our script and come over to our crouch right here. And if we are crouched, what we'll do is we will raycast, right? So if you are crouched here, so you can see here, if action is pressed, crouched, we don't need to worry about if there's anything above us. But if we let go, then we need to worry if there's something above us, so that way we don't uncrouch. So if we're crouched, then what we'll do is we'll make a raycast. So we'll say var space underscore state is equal to get world 3D dot direct space state. And then we can do our raycast. We can say var result is equal to space state dot intersect ray. And we need to pass in a physics raycast query parameter 3D. So what we'll do is we'll just create a new one. So we'll just say physics, P-H-Y-S-I, physics raycast. I did not like that. So let's try doing P-H-Y-S-I-C-S ray query parameters 3D. Let me see if I spelled that right. I did not. P-A-R-A-M-E-T-E-R-S dot create. And we'll pass in our position. So this is where we are raycasting from. So comma, and then where we're raycasting to. In our case, it's going to be our position plus a vector 3, 0, comma 2, comma 0. And then we will have to pass in our collision mask, which will be 1, and we need to exclude ourselves. Okay. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because first we need to create our physics raycast query parameter, which basically is just an object that houses these specific parameters. Simple enough, right? Our position we're casting from, our position we're casting to, which layer mask we're on. So if we click on our CSG mesh here, you can see we have our collision layer is 1 and our collision mask is 1. So we want this to be 1. And then self, because we don't want to intersect ourselves. If we don't have this array, what it will do is it will literally, when we crouch, we'll be raycasting against ourselves. And so we will think we have an object above us. So from here, we can basically just check if our result dot size is equal to 0. And if it is, then we know there's nothing above us. So then we can uncrouch. And that's basically all we need to do. So now we can just hit play just like that. And you'll see we are in our world. We can crouch, we can uncrouch, we can crouch and go under this object. And then when we let go, we actually are still crouched. And then if we walk, you can see over here on the bottom right of my screen, I'm not actually hitting a button. See, I can hit control and it doesn't really do anything. Now, if I come over here and I let off, you can see that it allows me to not collide with my stuff. Awesome. Now, if we want to make this a little bit better feeling, we could actually disable our collision shape earlier. We could actually come into our animation here like this, and we can just kind of drag this guy back to about here. And same thing with our crouch. We can kind of drag this back to this section right here instead of this section, because technically speaking, we're fully crouched, and it's going to feel kind of weird if you're fully crouched, but your character isn't able to get underneath, if that makes sense. So you can see how it kind of feels a little better if you disable your collision mesh a little earlier. You could really do it, wherever you would like, but that's basically how we can do our collision. Now that we have our crouching done, we need to set up our ability to basically use a lantern, right? So one of the big elements of a scary game is to have an actual, some kind of flashlight or lantern. So if we come into our actions here, we actually already built out an action in our project settings. So you can see here we have our flashlight action. So let's actually set that up. So we'll come in here and we'll come down to, I would say about here-ish, and we'll just say if input dot is action just pressed, and we'll say flashlight, then we can show our flashlight. Now, we don't actually have a flashlight to show, so if we go back to our character scene here, let's add in a flashlight. So we'll right click, add in a child node, and let's add in a little light here. We'll just add in an Omni light, just like that. And we'll put it somewhere right about here-ish. I believe that's about where we would be. So if we set this to reset and we look at our character's perspective, we can assume that if they're holding out a lantern, it'd be somewhere in this general area. So we'll put it out about here-ish, and we'll call this lantern, just like that. And then we can come into our animation, and just like we did our crouch, we'll do the same thing with our flashlight. So we'll hit new animation, and we will type flashlight show. And what we can do is we'll just drag this back to 0, and we'll call this one, actually this is flashlight show. So we're going to need two of them. We're going to need flashlight show and flashlight hide. So let's add another one. Flashlight hide, because I want to start with flashlight hide. So we'll select our Omni light. We'll go to our transform. We'll create that position. We'll put a nice keyframe there. And then we'll kind of drag it down here as if it's hidden, right? So we'll just drag this guy down here, and we will put a position keyframe. So when we hide our flashlight, we just kind of drop it down like that. Simple enough. Now we also need to change the brightness of our flashlight. So if we come to our light, we can set our energy from 1 and then go all the way over and then set it to 0. Just like that. So we'll Make sure this is set to 1. There we go. And it will fade away as they put it away. And then when they do the same thing with show, if we go to show, we can go to 1, put a keyframe on our energy, and put a keyframe on our transform, just like that. We can come back here like this, and we need to set it to the exact same spot as our hide. So we'll right-click our position and copy our property, go over to our flashlight show, go back to 0, right-click paste property, and put a keyframe. And we'll set our energy to 0, place a keyframe there. When it gets out to the front, we'll set the energy to 1 and put a keyframe there. So now when we go back to our character script, we can just basically do what we did last time, which is show or hide our flashlight. So we can just basically create a Boolean, kind of like we have if crouched, right? So we'll just come up to the top and say var flashlight is out, and I'll probably capitalize the L, and we'll say that is a bool, and by default it's going to be false, of course. And we'll come in here and we'll say if flashlight is out, then we want to put away our flashlight. So $animation player.play, and we will play our animation of hide. I believe it's hide flashlight or flashlight hide. Okay. So we'll say flashlight hide, and then we'll basically just copy this and say else flashlight show. And that should pretty much do it for us. And instead of doing what we did up here, where we kind of set our crouched equal to true or equal to false, instead, we know that this is going to be a binary action. So we can just say flashlight out is equal to not flashlight out. Now that's something that's really cool in code, is you can actually just flip your Boolean just like that, and it makes things a little easier. Instead of needing to do it like I did up here, it just kind of simplifies it a little bit. But the reason why we didn't do it up here was because there were some additional, things we needed to do, since this is a press and hold action versus a just singular press action. And I'm going to give this a little bit of breathing room here, because a lot of times your code shouldn't be really condensed, right? It causes problems with readability. So now that we have that, if we click on our test scene and hit play, if we hit F, we have a flashlight. If we hit F again, our flashlight goes away. And there we go. Simple enough. So now at this point, we're pretty much done with our character controller. We're probably about 30 minutes into this tutorial, so I think we can call it here. In the next video, we're going to go through the process of creating a basic enemy AI that just kind of walks around and goes from point to point to point. And then I think the episode after that, or the video after that, we're going to talk about creating a basic level and level design. And then we could talk about creating puzzles and things like that and really start actually making a game. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you all next time. Thanks.